Welcome back to Bet On It. You guys probably wanted us to talk about this game in the last segment, but it is such a primetime game, it gets its own segment this week. That's right, Penn State at Ohio State. It's going to be a knockdown, drag-out fight, or is it not? I'm looking at this going, Penn State's been out-yarded in half of its games this season, minus 33 net yards per game in their last 5 games. I bet against them once this year, and that was versus Minnesota. I do not have a good read on this Penn State team, I'll be honest with you. And there's Ohio State superseding expectations week in and week out. Of course, they don't get the cover when it hits 55 or whatever it was, but that was almost to be expected. I think they could have named the score. They called off the dogs. Marco, I'll start with you. Are you laying the points here with the Buckeyes?
No.
Okay.
Am I taking the points with Penn State? No. I'm looking at the total in this game, and Kelly, we're going to look at this one. And Penn State was in a horrible spot last week. They were coming off their first loss of the season against Minnesota, so we talk about the dream crusher effect. And then they had Ohio State on the horizon. Reason why I was on Indiana last week. Indiana got the cover, and you look at that game. Penn State went up and down the field against Indiana. Indiana doesn't have a great defense, but what concerns me in that game is Indiana also went up and down the field, okay? In Indiana, although they do have a good offense, it's not going to go toe-to-toe with Ohio State. So my concern here is, how does Penn State stop Ohio State? Now, on the flip side, we've got that factor. 2 things to consider here with Ohio State in this total. One, we're talking about late November in Ohio, so watch the weather on Saturday. Right now, they're calling for a light possible drizzle. That's not an issue if that's the situation. I still like this game to go over the total. The other thing that I'm looking at with Ohio State, last week they gave up 21 points to Rutgers. We know how bad Rutgers is. Well, what was different about last week? No Chase Young, best defensive player in the country, maybe the best player, period, in the country. And, the situation with the suspension, if he's out again, which is expected, this is not the same defense. And I think we're going to see most people, we talked about it last week or 2 weeks ago when we had the Alabama LSU. We talk about the old games. These are not these are not the same teams.
Correct.
Okay, all right. These teams are offensive-minded teams. In Ohio State, they're averaging the highest scoring team in the country at 51 points per game. There's only one way for me to play this game, and that's to look at the over with Ohio State.
All right, VR, you laying the lumber here with the Buckeyes?
I haven't bet this game. You've seen sharp money come in on the over. Public's going to be on the over as well. Books are going to be hoping for a low-scoring game, but I got to agree with Marco here. But wait and check on the weather. But personally, here's the bottom line. Penn State's played Ohio State really tough. I mean, the last 2 times, I think it was by 1 point they beat them. I know they haven't covered 3 straight. So, it seems like Penn State's been competitive against them. But you look at Ohio State, and here's what sticks out to me the most. Only 2 teams have been able to score more than 14 points against them. One was Florida Atlantic in week 1. The second was Rutgers last week. And why? Because those are teams they know pose no threat. They could blow those teams out. It's just a matter of how they could pick the score.
So you think they were being lazy?
It's all it was. And,
no, that's fair.
And you're sitting players. You're sticking in kids that barely are playing.
Especially if you're
up that much.
Yeah.
You're totally changing your game plan, everything. It's like you just don't want your guys to get hurt now.
Well, you don't want your guys to get hurt before a big game. And as you mentioned, you'd like to see how those backups do play.
Yeah, you want to get them. And when you're up by 40, that's when you're going to stick them in. So when you're giving that many points, I mean, you're going to get some back doors. You're going to get some junk touchdowns. But when Ohio State has had a team across from them where they pose any type of threat, they've completely shut them down. No, you can't score on them. And that's where I think they'll get a lead, and I think that lead will continue to grow. And eventually it'll end up being by 20, 24, and it'll end up covering the spread. I think Ohio State's the only way I can look. The only problem is you're not getting too much line value. I think if you – and most power ratings, guys that I respect, they have Ohio State up at the top right now. Everyone had to make that adjustment and give Ohio State their due. I don't think anyone would be favored over Ohio State right now on a neutral field. But again, even with that said, I don't think there's much line value where this number is right now. laying it, but there's no value taking it either. I think it's Ohio State or leave it alone.
You talked about the closest last 3 games between these two have been decided by a grand total of 5 points.
Yeah, yeah.
5 points.
Penn State
right.
had their number, man.
All right, great stuff. I can't wait to not watch this game, but mainly because due to time constraints. Let's bring in our resident let's bring in our resident stat guy, Mr. Ralph Michaels, with this week's TNA. All right, it's that time of the week. Mr. Ralph Michaels in studio, giving us all of the good stuff. I'm going to keep that intro short because you have a laundry list of stuff to give us in only 4 minutes. And rapid fire.
Well, week 8 on. So we're midway through the season, a little more in college football. Teams that are off a shutout win. Defense is playing well, right?
Yes.
It's that simple. Teams off a shutout win have covered 66% the last 5 years.
Wow.
Week 8 on. So we're not talking about those early games where you're playing a very weak foe or an FCS opponent. We're talking you're into conference play, you're into midseason, injuries taking effect. And when there's an over-under total of 60 or less, so, we're throwing out some high-scoring teams. Those teams have gone 21-7, 75% against the spread. One team fits, the team that pitched the shutout last week, Virginia Tech.
Ooh.
So the Hokies are in that role. This is one that I've talked about on numerous shows that I do. It's one that I've played. I've actually used this situation several times. And we're fading a team that's won 4 straight and has been pretty popular, but playing on a team that outgained its foes by 120 yards and won. So you probably weren't the better team on the field. You maybe got some turnovers. You maybe got some special teams touchdowns. Those teams have gone 14-34 the next game, covering only 29%. Now, this fade is on Illinois against Iowa. Sometimes, though, teams like Illinois have won 4 straight just learn how to win ugly games. So I am not going to get to the window in this one, but at least it's something easy to check on the box score.
But if you do like Iowa, then maybe that does get you to the window.
Absolutely. So simply, if a team got outgained by 120 or more yards and won the game, the next week they're an away dog, like Illinois, that's been a fade situation. This is one I love, and people always think when you get to 5 wins and it's November, you get to 6 wins, you go to a bowl. That's a promising and motivating tool. Well, we know that need doesn't necessitate you're going to win.
No kidding.
November teams with 5 wins, and now they're a home dog, 29-57 against the spread, 33.7%. So just because you need a 5th win, well, listen, you've gone through the season. You probably have more losses than you have wins. You're a home dog this week, so you're not the better team. 2 teams it applies to, Arizona State against Oregon and Charlotte against Marshall.
Oh.
Last week, I mentioned this as well. Remember, we talked about Cal?
Yes.
And we talked about Missouri. Did it get you off Missouri?
No, and I got to the window.
You said you were jumping off Missouri last week.
And everybody was like, you shouldn't listen to Ralph. Yeah, well, I'm
You said you were going to. All right, and last one. Road teams off back-to-back wins by 28 or more points, and their opponent allowed 35 or more points. So we have a team, dominant back-to-back wins. We have an opponent that gave up a lot of points. Well, 35 points, that's every Big 12 game, right? So, but that's not where we're going. Those teams, those road teams that are off back-to-back big wins, facing an opponent that gave up a lot of yards, 93-49 against the spread since 2014, so a big sample size.
Yeah.
66% covers, a very nice number, and it's the Oregon Ducks. Their last 2 wins, 56-24. Yep.
Okay.
34-6 win. Arizona State allowed 35 points.
So back-to-back, you have a fade on Arizona State and a play on Oregon. Will that get you to the window with the Ducks?
You know, they're up there for me. And having 2 strong systems that have nothing to do with each other. You know, a lot of times systems or angles intermix, and then there's some correlating numbers that overlap. There are no overlapping factors in these 2 things, which makes it even stronger.
All right, I like it. I may get to the window with Oregon. We're going to see. They're on my long list. We're going to see how this plays out this week. It is just Wednesday. Great stuff, as always, from Ralph. We're going to take a quick break, but when we return, it is time to walk those pups. That's right. Barking Dogs is up next. Get ready for those sprinkles, guys.